She woke up early that morning. The air was cool and quiet as she walked down the street to the small shop she worked at. She liked the calm hours before the city became crowded. People were rushing to work, buses were moving slowly, and the sounds of the city were just starting to grow. She kept her eyes on the pavement and her thoughts on the list of things she had to do today. The corner of the street, she noticed a man who seemed out of place. He was looking around as if he was searching for something. He did not notice her at first, but she felt drawn to the worry on his face. She watched him for a few moments and then hurried to her shop. She could not explain why, but a small concern for him settled in her mind. Her day passed as usual. She helped customers, arranged items on shelves, and made sure everything was clean. She glanced outside and wondered if the man was still there. She could not stop thinking about him. It was strange because she had never spoken to him before, but something about his presence felt important. Later that afternoon, a sudden commotion came from the street. A bicycle had fallen and the rider was struggling. She ran out to help. She saw the man from the morning, approaching quickly and pushing. Through the crowd, he was trying to help too, and together they managed to lift the bicycle and calm the rider. She smiled at him and he nodded back, grateful but tired. She felt a small thrill at being close to him, even if he did not notice her fully days. Passed and she saw him again at the same corner. He was always polite and quiet, but there was a sadness in his eyes. She never spoke to him directly. She just made small gestures like holding the door open or picking up something he dropped once. She noticed how careful he was and how he helped others without being asked. She admired him secretly and wished she could do more for him. One evening, as she closed the shop, she saw him struggling with heavy bags. She ran out and offered to carry one for him. He looked surprised and thanked her. She felt her heart beat faster. She did not want him to know that she cared so much. She only wanted to make his life a little easier and maybe keep him safe from small troubles that came his way over time. She learned about him without him ever telling much. She noticed where he liked to sit at the park, how he always helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries, and how he spent evenings reading quietly in a small cafe she watched from a distance. Feeling a mixture of happiness and longing, she never asked for his love or attention. She only wanted him to be safe and to know that someone cared. One rainy day, she saw him slipping on a wet step. She rushed to help and caught his arm before he fell. He looked at her with surprise. In a small smile, she felt warmth spread inside. She realized that her feelings were growing stronger, but she kept them hidden. She could not risk making things awkward. She only wanted to protect him and make sure he was never in danger if she could help. Yet she began noticing the small signs of danger in the city. She would warn him indirectly if she saw something unsafe. She would make sure he crossed streets carefully, and sometimes she would be there, quietly, when she thought he might need help. She never made it obvious, but her actions were sincere. She wanted to be someone who mattered to him, even if he did not know it. As time went on, her bond with him grew silently. She learned to read his moods and offered help without being asked. She found ways to support him from the shadows. She never asked for love. She never expected recognition. She only felt joy in knowing he was safe and cared for in a quiet way that no one else could see. This was the beginning of something that neither of them fully understood. She never spoke of her feelings, but every small act of kindness built a connection between them. Every time she helped him without words, it became a thread that tied their lives together in ways that were invisible but powerful. She never asked for love, but she was ready to give everything to protect him. If the day came when danger threatened him again, she noticed him more and more in her daily life. She watched quietly from the shop or the park. Sometimes she would see him on the street and her heart would tighten, as if she wanted to reach out and make his day easier without him knowing. She learned when he liked to go for walks, where he liked to sit, and which paths he took when the weather was nice. She began leaving small, helpful things near where he often sat. A folded newspaper, a bottle of water, a hot cup from the cafe she worked at. Small gestures that would not make him feel awkward, but would show that someone cared. She never saw him take these things directly, but sometimes she noticed a smile or a small nod. When he found them, she felt a quiet happiness knowing he was not alone. Even for a moment one afternoon, she saw him struggling with a heavy package from a shop across the street. She rushed to offer help, and he looked at her with surprise. She gently guided the package to the taxi. He was waiting for her, he thanked her softly, and she walked away before he could see the full depth of her concern. She wanted him to feel helped, not embarrassed. She began noticing the way he interacted with others. He was careful with children, he noticed. When someone dropped something, he made small acts of kindness that went unnoticed by many. But she watched and admired each moment. She began to imagine what it would be like to talk to him, to share a laugh or a quiet conversation. But she always stopped herself, remembering that her role was to be there when needed, not to demand attentions. She followed from a distance when she worried for his safety. She noticed a group of men on the street one evening that made her uneasy. She made sure to stay nearby and kept her eyes on him. She saw him cross the street to avoid them and breathed. A sigh of relief, her heart raced, but she never made her presence obvious. She knew that part of caring meant staying in the shadows. Sometimes days turned into weeks, and the bond grew without words. She found herself thinking of him often. She wanted to speak, but the fear of changing the delicate balance kept her silent. She discovered small things that made him smile. The way he enjoyed quiet mornings, the way he helped a lost dog find its way home. She remembered these details and sometimes tried to create small moments of happiness from afar. One morning she saw him on the edge of the riverbank looking at the water. She noticed his expression seemed troubled. She approached slowly, pretending to check on the benches near the river. She sat nearby quietly and made sure that if he needed help, she would be there. Her presence was a silent comfort. He did not speak, but she felt a connection in the shared silence. The river flowed steadily, and she felt that life continued even when there were worries. Another day, she noticed that he was not at the park where he usually sat. She worried and watched other places he might go. She saw him helping a young child untangle a kite string. She was relieved but also felt a small ache, knowing that she was not the first to share his attention. She reminded herself that her role was not to be noticed. She wanted him safe and happy, even if it meant remaining in the background. She began observing patterns in his life. She knew the hours he usually left work, the streets he liked, to walk the shops he frequented. She began to leave helpful things without being seen. She left an umbrella by the shop one rainy morning. She replaced a notebook he often dropped without drawing attention. She felt a quiet pride knowing he had small comforts and that someone was watching over him. Evenings were the hardest. She would watch him from the cafe across the street and see him lost in thought. She imagined what he might be thinking and wished she could say something encouraging. She never did. She only smiled softly from a distance and sometimes waved a hand. If their eyes met briefly, she wanted to show friendliness without revealing the depth of her feelings. One evening, she saw a car approaching too fast at a crosswalk. She noticed him walking ahead. She ran and reached him just in time, pulling him back to the sidewalk. The car passed quickly, and he looked startled. He smiled faintly as he realized what had happened. She felt her heart pound. She wanted to tell him to be more careful, but she only nodded silently and walked away. She knew that her actions spoke louder than words, and that sometimes care was best shown quietly. Her thoughts were often filled with him. She imagined conversations, walks, shared meals. She thought about what she might say if the chance ever came. She wanted to tell him about her concern about his safety, the small things she noticed, but she feared it might scare him away or make him uncomfortable. So she kept her feelings locked inside and focused on actions that could help without words. Life went on, and she became part of his routine. Without him realizing it, she knew when to be near to help him in small ways. She made sure he always had a safe path, a cup of warm drink, or a helping hand when needed. She took pride in being his silent guardian and felt joy in the knowledge that she could make his life easier even without recognition. Sometimes she thought about what love really meant. She realized that for her, it was not about receiving it, but giving it in ways that mattered. It was in the quiet moments, the small actions, and the invisible care. She never asked for his love, but she felt that her dedication could shape his life in ways he might never know, but that were real and meaningful. She began noticing small changes around him. The streets he walked became busier. Some people moved in ways that seemed threatening. She felt unease settle in her chest. She could not explain why, but a quiet warning inside her told her to be careful and pay attention to him more than usual. One afternoon, she saw him speaking with a man who seemed angry and impatient. She stayed at a distance, watching closely. She could not hear the words, but she noticed the tension, the quick gestures, the way he looked uneasy. She wanted to step forward, but she waited carefully not to be seen. She felt a mixture of fear and determination. Knowing that she might have to act quickly made her pulse quicken. The following days she watched more carefully. She noticed him changing his route, walking faster, looking over his shoulder. She felt a responsibility pressing on her heart. She began to plan how she could intervene if something went wrong. She followed quietly from a distance, made sure to know where he went, and when she could be nearby if needed. One evening, he was late leaving work. She waited nearby silently, watching the streetlights flicker. She saw a group of men standing near the exit. She could not tell if they had noticed him. She moved closer, making sure to stay hidden behind a column. She felt her hands clench. She wanted to make him aware, without startling him. She knew that sometimes silence and timing were the best protection. As he walked toward the street, she noticed one of the men step out into his path. She could see the tension rise. She ran across quickly, guiding him with a gentle touch to avoid a collision. The man looked at her confused, but she only nodded and stayed close until he was safely past the group. Her heart was racing. She felt relief wash over her, but she knew the danger was not over. She began leaving notes in safe places, small reminders to watch out or directions for safer paths. She never approached him directly with warnings. She wanted him to remain unaware of the full extent of the risk. She felt that her role was to protect him quietly, to prevent harm without drawing attention to herself. At night, she would follow the streets he walked from her own window. She noticed the way shadows moved and how quickly people passed by. She planned routes to intersect him. If something seemed unsafe, she felt nervous and alert every time he walked near the areas where danger lurked. She could not leave it to chance. She wanted to be there if he needed help. One day, she noticed him waiting at a crosswalk while a large truck passed nearby too fast. She ran out without thinking and caught his arm to pull him back. He looked at her, startled. She only gave a small nod to let him know it was nothing. She stayed with him until he reached the other side of the street, safe and unharmed. Her pulse was fast, but she felt calm, knowing she could act in time. She began observing small details about him more closely: his routine, his habits, the way he reacted to sudden changes in his environment. She realized that knowing these things could make the difference between safety and danger. She quietly memorized paths, exits, and potential risks. She never left him alone when the streets seemed uncertain. One rainy night, she noticed him slipping on the wet pavement. She dashed forward and held his arm steady. He looked surprised and said nothing, but he did not let go. She walked him carefully to the nearest shelter. He gave a small smile, and she felt a quiet joy knowing she had kept him safe. She never wanted recognition. She only wanted him to be unharmed. Days passed and the tension grew. She began noticing other people around him who seemed curious or too interested. She kept her distance, watching silently. She felt her heart tighten with worry. She knew that protecting him meant being ready at any moment. She prepared herself mentally for unexpected events. She thought about how to act swiftly without drawing attention, and how to use her knowledge of his habits to guide him to safety. One afternoon, he accidentally dropped a wallet on a busy street. She noticed a man reaching for it. She ran across and picked it up, guiding it back to him before he even realized it was missing. He looked surprised and thanked her softly. She smiled without speaking. She knew that small interventions like this built a protective thread between them. She never wanted him to know the full extent of her concern. She only wanted him to be safe. At night, she reflected on the growing dangers and her feelings. She realized that caring for him meant more than simple gestures. Now it meant being vigilant, constantly ready to step in. She never asked for anything from him. She only wanted to be someone who could ensure he moved safely through the world. She felt a mixture of fear, responsibility, and quiet satisfaction in her silent role. The city felt different to her, now more alive yet more threatening. She watched the streets, the lights, the people, and she planned ways to keep him out of harm. She followed quietly when necessary. She left helpful items when she could, and she prepared herself for situations she could not yet imagine. Her bond with him was silent, unspoken, and powerful. She had become his unseen guardian. She could feel the tension in the city growing as she moved quietly through the streets, keeping her eyes on him. She noticed shadows that seemed longer, the footsteps that echoed too closely in the hurried glances from people passing by. She felt a tight knot in her chest, but she knew she could not look away. Yes, she had to be there if danger came. One evening, she saw him leaving work as usual, but a group of men lingered near the corner. She stayed hidden. Watching carefully, she noticed their gestures, the way they blocked parts of the sidewalk, the way their eyes followed him. She felt her heart race and knew she had to act quickly. She planned to guide him away if needed without being noticed. As he walked toward the main street, one of the men stepped in front of him. She ran across and gently but firmly touched his arm. To change his direction, he looked surprised and stumbled slightly but moved safely out of the way. She stayed close enough to guide him to safety through a small side street. She could feel the danger slipping past, but she knew she had to remain alert until he reached home. The side street, she saw another man approaching. Quickly, he seemed aggressive. She instinctively stepped between them, guiding him behind a parked car. She held his arm carefully, making sure he would not panic. He looked at her questioning, but she only shook her head softly, indicating that he should stay calm. The man passed without noticing them, and she waited a few moments until she was sure it was safe. Her hands shook slightly as she guided him further. She realized that this was no longer about small acts of kindness. It was about protecting him from real threats. She felt her courage rise in a determination she had not known before. She knew she had to act decisively to keep him safe. Watched every movement and anticipated every possible danger. As they reached a quieter street, she noticed another man coming from behind. She quickly moved in front of him again and guided him to a narrow alley where they could move unseen. She kept her voice low and her gestures simple. She could feel her pulse pounding, but she stayed calm and focused. The alley led to a safe exit, away from the street, and she guided him through it with care. Once they were clear, she stepped back, allowing him to continue on his own. He looked back briefly, as if sensing her presence. She smiled softly but kept her distance. She felt a wave of relief wash over her, knowing that he was safe. She had never acted with such direct intervention before, and she realized that her feelings for him, cut, had grown even stronger. She wanted to protect him at all costs. Days later, she noticed him walking through a crowded area. She saw a person pushing toward him forcefully. She ran forward and grabbed his arm to steady him. She guided him out of the crowd to a quieter area. He looked confused and startled. She only nodded and walked a few steps with him to make sure he was unharmed. She felt a mixture of fear and satisfaction, knowing that her actions had prevented potential harm. She began planning more carefully. She mapped routes she knew were safer. She memorized the locations of possible threats. She learned the times when certain streets were more dangerous. She never told him any of this. She only acted silently and watched from a distance. She wanted to be a presence he never noticed until she intervened at the right moment. One rainy night, she noticed him approaching a busy intersection. She saw a car speeding through the light. She dashed forward and pulled him back to the sidewalk. Just as the car passed, he looked startled and glanced at her. She only gave a small nod, indicating that he was safe. She stayed nearby until he disappeared into a building. She felt her heart racing, but she also felt calm. Knowing she had prevented disaster, she began to notice her own strength. She could make decisions in moments of danger. She felt more confident and more capable than she had ever felt before. She understood the responsibility she had taken on and embraced it fully. She knew that her actions were silent but powerful. The city felt different now. Her eyes were always alert. She moved quietly. She anticipated danger and prepared herself mentally. She knew that protecting him might mean putting herself at risk, but she felt ready. She realized that her care had grown into something deeper, something that made her willing to face fear and uncertainty for his sake. As weeks passed, the incidents became more frequent. She learned to read situations before they escalated. She guided him without him noticing. She prevented accidents without recognition. She felt a quiet pride and an intense emotional connection to his safety. She never expected gratitude. She only wanted him to remain unharmed and to feel the subtle comfort of someone silently watching over him. One evening, as he walked down a narrow street, she noticed shadows moving quickly nearby. She ran ahead and positioned herself so that she could intervene if needed. She noticed the expressions of people around her and guided him safely past without letting him see the full extent of her vigilance. Her hands were steady, her mind sharp, and her heart full of quiet determination. She realized that her life had changed. She had become someone alert, capable, protective she felt a strong bond with. Him that grew through every silent act of care. She never asked for recognition or love. She only wanted to be his unseen guardian and to ensure that he remained safe through every possible challenge. She had risked much, but she had gained a deeper understanding of courage and selflessness through her actions. After the days of danger had passed, she felt a mixture of relief and quiet sadness. The city seemed calmer, but she knew the risk was never completely gone. She continued to watch from a distance, making sure he moved safely through the streets. She noticed small details, the way he walked the streets he chose, and the way he helped others. Without realizing someone was watching over him, she reflected on everything she had done. Her small acts of kindness, her moments of intervention, and the courage she had found within herself. She realized that she had changed. She had become stronger, more aware, more capable. She had grown through the act of caring and protecting without ever asking for recognition or reward. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that she had made a difference. He continued his routine, unaware of the full extent of her involvement. She saw him helping a child with a fallen toy she saw him holding. The door opened for an elderly woman. She noticed the way he smiled at small acts of kindness around him. She felt proud knowing that she had kept him safe so that he could continue to be the person she admired so much. Sometimes she left small tokens of care near him, a cup of warm tea, a note with a kind message, a small object that might make his day easier. She never expected him to know they were from her. She only wanted him to feel the comfort and support without realizing where it came from. She found joy in these quiet gestures and the invisible threads that connected them. Her thoughts often wandered to the moments of danger when she had acted to protect him. She remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had succeeded. She realized that caring for someone did not always need to be spoken, could be shown through actions, through vigilance, through selflessness. She had become a part of his life without ever being seen as anything more than a stranger. Sometimes she began to notice subtle changes in herself. She was calmer in difficult situations, more observant, more patient. She had learned to read small signs, the expressions of people, the way streets moved, and how danger could be avoided. She realized that through protecting him, she had also learned to protect herself and navigate the world more carefully and wisely. One evening, she saw him at the park, sitting on the bench. She had often observed he was watching the sunset and seemed at peace. She felt a small warmth in her heart. She knew that he was safe and that her presence had helped him reach this moment without harm. She stayed a distance away, enjoying the simple scene. She did not need him to know she was there. She only needed to see that he was unharmed and content. She thought about love and what it meant to her. She realized that love could be silent and unseen. It could be expressed through acts of courage, through selflessness, through the willingness to risk comfort and safety for someone else. She had never asked for his love. She had never spoken of her feelings. She had only acted and protected quietly, knowing that her actions spoke in ways words could not. The city moved on around her. The people, the streets, the noise continued. She blended into it, watching over him without being noticed. She had become a part of his unseen world, a quiet guardian who made sure that he could continue his life safely. She felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her sacrifices had meaning and impact even without recognitions. Sometimes she imagined a world where she could tell him everything, where she could explain the risks she had taken and the care she had given. She imagined the gratitude and surprise on his face, but she knew that the joy she found in her actions did not require him to know. She had already received the reward in the form of safety and knowing he continued without harm. She reflected on the growth in herself. She had learned courage, patience, vigilance, and the depth of selfless care. She understood that life was fragile and that one could make a difference quietly. She had done so without fanfare, without recognition, and with complete devotion to the well-being of another. She felt a deep sense of purpose and peace in this understanding. As the days continued, she maintained her watch. She helped from a distance, guided when necessary, left small signs of care. She never interfered unless needed. She became skilled at timing, at reading situations, and at keeping him safe without disrupting his life. She felt that this was the truest form of love. a love that did not demand attention or reward, but existed solely to protect and support silently in quiet moments, she thought. Of him smiling at small joys, helping others, walking the streets confidently. She knew that her actions had helped create these moments. She felt pride, joy, and quiet fulfillment. She understood that her life and his had intersected in meaningful ways even without recognition, and that her silent care had shaped both of their lives in subtle but real ways. She never asked for love. She never expected thanks. She never sought attention. She had risked much, but gained courage, wisdom, and purpose. She had become a silent guardian, a quiet protector, and in doing so, she had discovered the truest form of care. The bond they shared was invisible, yet strong a connection. Built on selfless acts, courage, and unwavering dedication, she continued watching. From a distance, knowing that her presence, even unseen, had made a difference, and that was enough for her. She continued her quiet watch over him, even as the seasons changed, the leaves fell and streets grew colder, yet she remained attentive. Her life had shifted into a rhythm that revolved around noticing him, noticing the small risks and small joys that made each day significant. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, mixed with a quiet joy, knowing she could help him without interrupting his life. One morning, she saw him struggling with packages again. She rushed to offer help. She could feel her hands shake slightly from worry and the cold. Yet she focused on steadying him and guiding the bag safely to the taxi waiting nearby. He glanced at her briefly and smiled softly. She returned the gesture with a small nod and walked away silently, pleased that he was unharmed and that her care had been effective. As she observed him more closely, she noticed how he paused at certain shops, how he greeted familiar faces, how he helped people along the way. She realized that by protecting him, she had also learned to understand him more deeply. Without speaking, she began predicting his movements, knowing which streets would be crowded and when to act if something went wrong. She felt a mixture of pride and humility, knowing that she had grown through this silent dedication. One rainy afternoon, she noticed him slipping near a busy intersection. She ran forward, catching his arm and steadying him against a passing car. She felt her heart pound. She guided him to the sidewalk safely without drawing attention. He looked startled but unharmed. She stayed nearby until he disappeared safely into a building. She felt relief and a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her instinct had been right and her action effective. She began leaving small reminders of safety in places he frequented. She placed umbrellas near the benches he liked, small notes with directions or cautions. She knew he might never notice the source, but she found comfort in knowing he would be guided subtly. Her care was invisible yet tangible, and that knowledge gave her peace. She understood that love could exist quietly and without expectation. Days turned into weeks, and she noticed patterns of risk. She watched how certain streets became crowded at specific times, how some areas could be unsafe at night. She memorized routes she would take. If she needed to intervene, she felt ready for any situation, knowing that preparation and observation were as important as courage. She became a silent protector who moved carefully and watched diligently. One evening, she noticed him being followed from a distance. She ran discreetly, staying behind trees and shadows. She saw a man trying to approach him quickly. She guided him to a side street unseen, helping him avoid confrontation. She felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She knew that the stakes were higher now and that her role as a protector required alertness and decisiveness. She kept her presence hidden, but her attention focused. Her thoughts often drifted to the emotional weight of her care. She had never asked for love. She had never expected acknowledgement. Her joy came from knowing that he was safe. Her heart beat faster when she saw him unharmed. She had discovered a new strength in herself, a combination of courage, vigilance, and selfless concern that shaped her daily life and her understanding of what it was meant to truly care. She continued to observe subtle behaviors. She noticed when he hesitated before crossing streets, when he seemed uncertain about moving through crowds. She used these moments to guide him subtly without drawing attention. She placed objects to help him navigate safely. She prepared alternative paths and planned contingencies. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction knowing her actions made a difference, even if he never knew one night. A sudden loud noise startled a crowd in the street. She saw him moving toward danger. She ran swiftly and grabbed his arm, guiding him behind a wall safely. She stayed close until the commotion passed. She could feel her pulse racing, yet her mind clear and focused. She realized that these experiences had strengthened her courage and honed her ability to act decisively when needed. Over time, she noticed the cumulative effect of her actions. He continued his life unaware of the invisible guardian who watched over him. She saw the moments when he was able to move safely and help others. She felt pride knowing her care had enabled these moments. She had built a silent network of protection and guidance, and it had made a tangible impact on his life and on her own growth. She reflected on what love meant to her. She realized that love could be expressed in many ways, not always through words or confessions, but through actions, through vigilance, through care that demanded nothing in return. Her feelings had deepened into a bond that was powerful yet unseen. She had learned the patience of observation, the courage to act, and the quiet joy of giving selflessly. As the weeks passed, she continued her watch. She anticipated risks and intervened silently. She left small comforts and guided him through potential hazards. She felt a sense of accomplishment knowing that her unseen efforts contributed to his well-being. She understood that this dedication had changed her life as much as it had changed his. She had become someone who acted quietly, yet effectively, a guardian without recognition. Quiet moments, she imagined him living a full and happy life. She pictured him walking confidently through the streets, helping others, enjoying simple pleasures. She knew that her silent protection had helped shape these experiences. She never expected acknowledgement. She never wanted her presence known. She found fulfillment in the act itself, knowing that she had made a difference and that her care had the power to protect and sustain him in ways he might never see. She felt the weight of her silent role more than ever. The city moved quickly around her, but she remained focused on the one she cared for. She noticed the subtle shifts in crowds, the timing of buses, the flow of pedestrians. She felt that each day brought new challenges and new responsibilities. She had learned to anticipate danger and respond without hesitation. She had grown stronger and more confident through the act of protecting him. One morning, she saw him walking toward the train station carrying a heavy bag. She rushed forward without drawing attention and offered help. She guided him carefully onto the platform, making sure he did not slip. She could feel her pulse racing from the adrenaline, but her mind remained focused on ensuring his safety. He looked at her briefly and nodded as if acknowledging her presence. She smiled quietly and stepped back, blending into the crowd. She began observing his routine more closely, noticing patterns she had not before. She saw which streets were safer at different times of day, how the light fell on certain corners, and where the crowds gathered. She used this knowledge to predict potential risks. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her vigilance had tangible effects on his well-being. Goni afternoon, she noticed a suspicious man following him. She kept her distance, hiding behind a lamppost. She saw the man quicken his pace as he approached. He seemed intent on stopping him. She moved faster. Staying out of sight, she guided him to a quieter street where the shadows and parked cars provided cover. She felt a mixture of fear and determination. She knew she had to act decisively to prevent any harm. The man approached from another direction. She intercepted silently, positioning herself between him and the one she watched over. She guided him past, unnoticed. She felt the tension in her chest and the adrenaline rushing through her veins. She realized that protecting him now required courage and alertness. She had learned to trust her instincts and rely on her knowledge of the streets to navigate risk. Evenings were the most challenging. She watched him as he walked home. She noticed the long shadows, the dark alleys, and the groups of people who might pose a threat. She moved carefully through the streets, staying nearby without being seen. She felt a sense of duty that went beyond simple care. She had become a guardian whose presence was unseen, but essential. One rainy night, she saw him slip near a busy intersection. She rushed forward and caught his arm, guiding him to safety. She felt the rush of relief as he steadied himself. He looked surprised but unharmed. She smiled quietly and stayed nearby until he disappeared into the safety of a building. She felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that she had prevented harm without his awareness. She began leaving small signs of care in the places he frequented. A hot drink from the cafe, a small umbrella on a bench, a note with a kind message she never expected him to know the source. She found joy in knowing that someone cared without needing recognition. She understood that love could be expressed through actions, through vigilance and selflessness, without the need for acknowledgement. Days turned into weeks, and she noticed patterns of risk becoming more complex. She memorized routes and exits. She observed people around him. She watched for anything that might endanger him. She moved quickly when needed, yet always carefully to avoid drawing attention. She had become skilled at anticipating danger and acting swiftly. She felt pride in her abilities and in the quiet power of her care. One afternoon, she saw him helping an elderly woman cross a busy street. She noticed a cyclist approaching quickly from behind. She ran forward and guided both safely to the sidewalk without them realizing the full danger. She felt a surge of relief and quiet triumph. She knew that her presence had made a real difference. She had become a silent protector who acted instinctively and effectively even. In her own moments of solitude, she reflected on her feelings. She realized that her love for him was expressed through these acts of care. She had never asked for recognition. She had never sought acknowledgement. She found meaning in the act itself and the courage she had discovered and the difference she had made in his life. She understood that selfless care could be the most profound form of connection. One evening, she noticed a car moving recklessly toward him at a crosswalk. She ran and pulled him back to the sidewalk just in time. He looked startled but safe. She stayed nearby, watching until he disappeared. She felt a mixture of fear, relief, and quiet pride. She understood that her vigilance and action had preserved his life and reinforced the strength of her unseen bond. She continued to refine her observations. She noticed how the flow of people shifted during different times of day, how the weather affected the streets, how the light cast shadows that might hide dangers. She incorporated these details into her planning. She moved through the city with purpose and confidence, ready to act if necessary. She felt empowered by the knowledge that her presence had an impact even when unnoticed. One rainy afternoon, she saw him approaching a crowded plaza. She noticed a group of people moving erratically. She ran forward, subtly positioning herself to guide him away from the risk. She led him through a safer path. She felt the satisfaction of seeing him safe, and unaware of the full extent of her intervention, she had learned to blend action with subtlety, balancing courage with discretion. As the days went on, she noticed that the risks became more unpredictable. She observed and adapted. She memorized new routes and exits. She remained attentive to his routine and the environment around him. She had developed a keen awareness and agility. She felt a sense of purpose and connection that grew deeper with each day of care and vigilance. Her feelings had deepened into a silent devotion. She had become a presence in his life that influenced his safety and comfort without him ever knowing. She had learned patience, courage, and the depth of selfless love. She continued to act with careful attention and unwavering dedication. She found meaning in each intervention, each small act that ensured he moved through life safely. One evening, she noticed him walking near a construction site. She saw tools scattered and a worker moving quickly. She ran forward and guided him through an alternate path. She felt the rush of responsibility and relief. She knew that her quick thinking had prevented potential harm. She realized that her dedication had grown into a skill set built on courage, vigilance, and intuition. When she was not near him, she thought of ways to enhance his safety. She noted patterns of traffic, crowds, and potential hazards. She found subtle ways to provide comfort and assistance through small gestures and interventions. She understood that care could be expressed in ways that were quiet yet effective. She had become a guardian who acted invisibly yet powerfully. The city had become both familiar and challenging. She moved through it with awareness. She anticipated danger. She guided and protected. He continued his life unaware but safe. She felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that her vigilance mattered. She understood that love could be expressed silently and still have the deepest impact. Days turned into weeks, and her observations became more intuitive. She noticed subtle changes in his expression, movements, and behavior. She used these signs to plan actions and interventions. She moved with discretion, blending her presence with the environment. She had developed a rhythm of care that balanced attention, courage, and subtlety. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment in her role. One rainy night, she noticed him crossing a busy street. She saw a car running a red light. She dashed forward and pulled him back to safety. She felt the adrenaline and relief in equal measure. She stayed nearby until he was safely out of the danger zone. She realized that her presence and action had prevented potential disaster. She had become confident in her ability to act and protect without recognition. Even in quiet moments, she reflected on her growth. She had learned patience, vigilance, courage, and selfless devotion. She understood that love could be expressed through protection, through action, through quiet attention. She had become a silent force in his life, shaping his safety and comfort without ever seeking acknowledgement. She felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing her care mattered. She continued her watch over him through the streets and parks, the crowded areas and quiet corners. She guided him subtly, ensuring safety and comfort. She left small tokens of care. She anticipated dangers and intervened. Silently, she had become a guardian whose presence was invisible yet essential. She understood the depth of selfless care and continued to act with dedication, courage, and subtle love. Her connection to him remained unspoken yet profound. She observed and protected. She acted when necessary. She left subtle signs of care. She understood that her silent devotion had power and meaning. She had become an unseen force that shaped his safety and well-being. She felt pride and fulfillment in her ability to protect and care without recognition. She continued her vigilance with unwavering dedication and quiet love.